Lesson number 7 covers John chapters 9 and 10. The occasion is different, but it is a continuation of the developing conflict between Jesus and the authorities in Jerusalem that we have to deal with continuing in this lesson tonight, chapters 9 and 10. See if we can keep fixed in our mind some dates. Chapter 6 mentioned the Passover. Chapter 6 has its setting in Galilee, but it mentions a Passover that was approaching 1 year before the last Passover. Then chapters 7 and 8 are dated in at the Feast of Tabernacles of that year. So we go from the Passover, which would be about April, the spring of the year, to the fall. The Feast of Tabernacles would fall in October. And now, both chapters 9 and 10 can be dated from a verse that is given in chapter 10, indicating the time and the occasion as being the Feast of Dedication. Now, if I have time, I'll give a brief explanation of what that refers to, but it fell in December. And the Passover, then, at which Jesus dies, will be the next April. So we've moved from 1 April to the fall of the year, October, to December. There's no indication whether Jesus went back to Galilee after the Feast of Tabernacles in October. Likely remained in the vicinity of Jerusalem. And in December he was found again in Jerusalem. And we have 2 chapters with a lot in them to consider tonight, so we'll have to move along to get them all read. And I would like to at least get some coverage of them. Chapter 9 is one of the most interesting accounts in the Gospel of John, and it is one that gives us some insight, I think, into John's methods. At the end of the Gospel, he tells us his purpose. These signs are written that you may believe, and that believing you may have life in his name. I think when you analyze an incident such as this in chapter 9 and the debate over the healing of this blind man, it'll give us some insights into John's methods, what there is in the account that he gives us that is expected to bring people to faith, how it would work on somebody's mind and lead him to the conclusion that Jesus was the Christ, the Son of God. And Jesus was the Word, we're told in the first chapter. The Word was God and was made flesh and dwelt among men as a man. He came among men, and that divided men into 2 great camps. Some believed, some did not. From the beginning, there was a hostility on the part of Jewish authorities in Jerusalem. The 2nd chapter mentions that first Passover where they were already challenging him and in a hostile way. Show us a sign, giving authority for doing what they should have been doing themselves, cleansing the temple courts. So there was hostility from the beginning, but it grows and it develops, and the thing that we're concentrating now on in this portion of John from chapter 7 and on is this developing conflict that ends in the determination on the part of the Sanhedrin to put him to death. The healing of the blind man is described, chapter 9, verses 1 through 12. And as he passed by, he saw a man blind from his birth, and his disciples asked him, saying, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he should be born blind? So that gives you a little insight into their theology. They related human suffering to some sin that somebody had committed. And as Jesus answers them, we see that that is not the case. Chapter 5 indicated a case where a man evidently did suffer because of sins he had committed, but that is not just a generality. And verse 3 has Jesus answering them this way, Neither did this man sin nor his parents, but that the works of God should be made manifest in him. So this is one of the passages that show that suffering is not always directly connected with some sin that somebody's committed. Now he says, We must work the works of him that sent me while it is day. The night cometh, when no man can work. When I am in the world, I am the light of the world. When he had thus spoken, he spat on the ground, made clay of the spittle, and anointed his eyes with the clay, and said unto him, Go, wash in the pool of Siloam, which is by interpretation, sent. He went away therefore, and washed, and came seeing. The neighbors therefore, and they that saw him aforetime, that he was a beggar, said, Is not this he that sat and begged? Let me pick it up from there in a minute. First, let's make a point here. What claim does Jesus make here? It's one of the I ams. I am what?
The light.
I am the light of the world. Now, how is that related to the miracle?
Light to see.
Okay. He gives light to a man and demonstrates the claim that he made. Can you think of other connections like this in the Gospel of John? He says, I am the bread of life after what? Feeding the multitude and showing his ability to provide the means of life. When we come to chapter 11, he will say, I am the resurrection and the life, and he does so at the grave of Lazarus, whom he will call forth from the grave. So he makes these claims, but he has the signs to support.
The water.
The woman in the well.
How's that connected with a miracle?
Oh,
I thought you said his thirst no more.
Okay, there are several of those, but I'm thinking of
Is,
several places.
Is there ever a time that there was a miracle performed that he did it to do it any other reason other than to teach? Every time he performed a miracle, wasn't it to teach someone or to show it? I can't think of any other time.
I'm not sure. We have to think through that.
I'm just trying to think. I couldn't think of any time when it wasn't to teach somebody or to do something like that.
Okay. Then, in the reactions, I believe we have the sort of thing that John records that really puts us in position to make a judgment about the reality of the thing that is reported here. The neighbors, therefore, and they that saw him aforetime, that he was a beggar, now these were the people who would know about him, they'd know this man, said, Is not this he that sat and begged? Others said, It is he. Others said, No, but he's like him. They just couldn't quite believe it could be him. It's just somebody that looks like him. He said, I am he. So John is just a reporter who gives us the facts, what people were saying about this, and we are left to read and to make a judgment. Let that impress itself on our minds. They said therefore unto him, How then were thine eyes opened? He answered, The man that is called Jesus made clay and anointed mine eyes, and said unto me, Go to Siloam and wash. So I went away and washed, and I received sight. And they said unto him, Where is he? He saith, I know not. So for the first time now he makes this explanation. He'll be called in before authorities who have some control over the synagogues, and will have to make this explanation again, and they even ask him to do it a third time, as we'll see, with a pretty sharp answer from him. But one of the things I think to be noticed here is the developing conviction of this man about Jesus. Now first, he'll just indicate the man named Jesus, that is called Jesus. But we'll have a development in this man's conviction about Jesus all the way down to the end. Let's follow that as we go. Now verse 13, the blind man and the Pharisees in controversy here. They bring to the Pharisees him that aforetime was blind. Now it was the Sabbath on the day that Jesus made the clay and opened his eyes. And that becomes an important point in this discussion. Again, therefore, the Pharisees also asked him how he received his sight. And he said unto them, He put clay upon mine eyes, and I washed, and I see. Reactions now. Some, therefore, of the Pharisees said, This man is not from God, because he keepeth not the Sabbath. But others said, How can a man that is a sinner do such signs? And there was a division among them. So John just lets us in on this little bit of a controversy that arose over this matter among the Pharisees, the leading people of the Jews. They reached different conclusions about him because they had different starting points. Now, the assumption, the major premise of one group was he has violated the Sabbath, making this mud, anointing the man's eyes with it. He's violated the Sabbath, therefore he cannot be from God. He's a sinner. Others started from the reality of the miracle. He's done these signs. How can a man he cannot be a sinner. How can a man that is a sinner do such things? So they reached different conclusions because they started from different premises, and there was a division among them. So they inquire further. Verse 17, they say therefore unto the blind man again, what sayest thou of him, in that he opened thine eyes? And he said, he is a prophet. Second point. This man is called Jesus. Now, he's a prophet. The Jews, therefore, did not believe concerning him that he had been blind and had received his sight, until they called the parents of him that received his sight and asked them, saying, is this your son, who ye say was born blind? How then doth he now see? So here's the first position they're going to try to take. They'll deny that he was ever blind, that he was born blind. They just deny that. So they call his parents. Here's some people that'll be able to testify to that. So let's listen to the testimony of the parents. Verse 20. His parents answered and said, we know that this is our son, and that he was born blind. But how he now seeth, we know not. Or who opened his eyes, we know not. Ask him. He is of age. He shall speak for himself. These things said his parents because they feared the Jews. For the Jews had agreed already that if any man should confess him to be Christ, he should be put out of the synagogue. So they had power and threatened the people, and were able to subject them to something like excommunication, I guess, that they not be able to come to the synagogue and be recognized as faithful Jews. Now, the parents are as close-mouthed as they can be. But the fact of the business is, on this question of how he was seeing, they couldn't testify to that anyway, could they? Whatever they'd say would be hearsay. So what they do testify is the thing that they know from first-hand knowledge. We know this is our son. We know he was blind. You'll have to ask him how he sees. They also imply that he sees. They know that. How he now seeth, we know not. But they can testify that he sees. So that's the parents. John just reporting bits of testimony here about this miracle. Therefore, verse 23, said his parents, he is of age. Ask him. So now the second examination of the blind man. So they called a second time the man that was blind and said unto him, give glory to God. We know that this man is a sinner. So come clean on this. There must be something you're not telling us. Tell the whole story here somewhat is their meaning here. So here's his reply. He therefore answered, whether he is a sinner, I know not. One thing I know, that whereas I was blind, now I see. Listen, I'm no theologian. I'll leave it to you to decide those kind of questions, whether he's a sinner or not. I just know one thing. I used to be blind, now I see. I know that. That's his testimony. You just have to love this blind man. Sharp fella. They said therefore unto him, what did he to thee? How opened he thine eyes? He answered them, I told you even now, and ye did not hear. Wherefore would ye hear it again? Would ye also become his disciples? Well, the only other alternative was they just want to hear it again and try to trip him up some way or set some kind of a trap for him. So would you also become his disciples? That was the wrong thing to say. Verse 28. And they reviled him and said, thou art his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. We know that God has spoken unto Moses, but as for this man, we know not whence he is. The man answered and said unto them, why herein is the marvel that ye know not whence he is, and yet he opened mine eyes. We know that God heareth not sinners, but if any man be a worshipper of God and do his will, him he heareth. Since the world began, it was never heard that anyone opened the eyes of a man born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. So you see the progress. The man called Jesus, he's a prophet. They say this man's a sinner. He said, I don't know about that. I just know he restored my sight. Now, they have just browbeat this man till they have driven him to a new conviction about Jesus. When they say, we are disciples of Moses, we know he spoke from God, we don't know where this man came from. Well, he said, that's the greatest miracle of all. Here's the marvel, that you don't know where this man came from, and he opened my eyes. Nobody's ever been able to do that. Open the eyes of somebody born blind. You know that God would not hear a sinner and enable him to do that. That's the greatest marvel of all, that you don't know where he is, where he's from. That's just surface stuff. You don't have to dig all that deep to see that. So from, I don't know whether he's a sinner or not, now they've driven him to the conclusion he can't be a sinner. All right, verse 34. They answered and said unto him, Thou wast altogether born in sins, and dost thou teach us? And they cast him out. And evidently, in the sense of verse 22, that a man should be put out of the synagogue. Thou wast altogether born in sins, and dost thou teach us? What do you reckon they're referring to? You were born in sins. He was born blind. See, they're going to take about the same position that the apostles thought may be true. Did this man sin, or his parents, that he should be born blind? So, when they take this position that his being born blind is an indication he's altogether born in sin, just brush him aside that way, then they give up what? It's just a complete surrender of the thing they've been trying to argue, that the man never was blind in the first place. So they're just going to try everything. They'll debate this, they'll debate that, they'll try any kind of a position, contradictory positions, inconsistent positions, but one thing they will not do, they will not confess the thing that sign points to. They will not examine that with an open mind and confess that he must be the light of the world.
That's what he drew them to with his statements.
Yeah.
That it had to be God.
So this conflict and controversy, it causes him to rise in his conviction, and they just deal with it in another way. So that's interesting. It's the same kind of evidence put before people, and it causes one to react one way and others to react another way.
I think something else of significance about this too, and there seems to be some parallelism between this and Naaman. You know, when Naaman was told to go and dunk himself 7 times in the Jordan, the muddy river as it was, here this man was told to go and wash, and he had to obey a command to do it. And I think the fact, I just wondered if he'd ever seen if he hadn't obeyed Jesus and saying to go and wash the clay out of his eyes.
Yeah.
And there seems to be a contrary too, the muddy river, the Jordan, and plus the fact that Jesus uses clay.
F.F. Bruce thinks that may suggest why he acknowledged him as being a prophet. What do you say about it? He's a prophet. May have thought back to something like that and connected that with Elisha and Naaman. That's speculation, but we have had similar things. When he multiplied the loaves and fishes to feed the multitudes, they thought of Moses in the wilderness. Moses gave us the manna from heaven. What sign do you do? And so on. Seems like there's been another one of that kind. Okay, then the end of the story at verse 35. Jesus heard that they had cast him out, and finding him, he said, Dost thou believe on the Son of God? Now remember, this man has never seen Jesus. He's heard his voice. He's not seen him. He answered and said, And who is he, Lord, that I may believe on him? Now that tells you something about the progress of this man. All that'll be necessary is what?
Point him out.
Yeah, just he has this kind of trust in Jesus, whoever he points to. He'll believe in him. Jesus said unto him, Thou hast both seen him, and he it is that speaketh with thee. And he said, Lord, I believe. And he worshiped him. So you see the progress. The man called Jesus, a prophet, I don't know whether he's a sinner or not, and then driven from that to say he can't be a sinner. It couldn't have happened on that assumption. And then finally the recognition of him as being the Son of God and the Messiah here as it ends. And then these closing words from Jesus, verse 39 and following. And Jesus said, For judgment came I into the world, into this world, that they that see not may see, and they that see may become blind. Sounds like a contradiction of something he had said earlier in John 3, in verse 17, where he said he came not into the world to judge the world, but that the world may be saved through him. But what it goes on to point out, even in John 3, is that his coming had the effect of a judgment. This is the judgment. The light has come into the world, and men love the darkness because their deeds were evil. On the other hand, some who loved the truth came to the light. So there was a judgment that took place. The unbeliever was judged. He judged himself. The light came. He didn't like the light. He left it. He was like the roaches looking for the darkness. So he came to save, but he could not come to save without his coming having the effect of a judgment. Now the sun is not for the purpose of casting shadows. It shines, it gives light. But it can't do that without casting shadows. And I think you've got the same kind of a thing. Jesus comes to save, but the effect of his coming to save is going to be that he'll be rejected by many. And so it'll have the effect of a judgment taking place. Now he explains it when he says that they that see not may see, and that they that see may become blind. Now in verse 29, those Pharisees said, we know that God has spoken unto Moses. They see. We know. In verse 34, they say to this man, you were born in sins, and dost thou teach us? Teach us? They see. Came that they that see may become blind. So they boast of their sight, though they are really blind. And so they don't realize they're blind morally and spiritually. And not realizing that, then they don't come to the light and they remain in darkness. And then they overhear this, verse 40, those of the Pharisees who were with him heard these things and said unto him, are we also blind? Jesus said unto them, if ye were blind, ye would have no sin. But now ye say, we see, your sin remaineth. I think they're saying, we see is explained by that. We know. You're going to teach us? That was their attitude. We see. If you were blind, a person understands his blindness and comes to the one who says, I am the light of the world, and he can be healed of that. And in a moral and a spiritual sense, he talks about sin. You would have no sin. You can have the sin removed. You can walk in the light and escape the darkness. So he takes them at their word. They say, we see. If they were blind, if they realized their blindness, they would seek sight from Jesus and see. The blind man is an example in the physical world, and he claims, though, to be the light of the world. Spiritual light is the thing that he gives. But when they don't admit their blindness and they say, we see, then of course they don't seek sight. And they remain in their sin and in their blindness. I think that may be the point of that. And the key to it would be then in that, not that they were blind, but we say. You say, we see. So that claim they didn't understand their blindness, so they didn't come to him for sight. They remained in their sin. Think about that. Difficult ending to that chapter. Okay, the chapter 10 is just a continuation, I think, of the same occasion. And the thing that makes that very clear is 3 points. In the first place, there's no break, there's no change of circumstances that's indicated in chapter 10, verse 1. And then, the thing that Morris points out in his commentary is that this opening, verily, verily, is an expression that never stands elsewhere at the beginning of a discourse. He never just starts a speech that way. So this is a continuation of the thing that he had been saying. And then the third point is verse 21, where the people hear him and they say, can a demon open the eyes of the blind? This is something that's still on their minds. So chapter 10 just continues the account. And I think that helps us. I believe we'll be able to see who he's dealing with. And when he talks about thieves and robbers, and it becomes pretty transparent who he's referring to. Some who not out for the good of the sheep. This is going to be the address about the good shepherd. Thieves and robbers not interested in the sheep. They want to steal them. They want to slaughter them. They want to use them for their own purposes. And that's the way the Pharisees had treated this man. They're not interested in that blind man, so they end up casting him out of the synagogue. Jesus shows himself to be the good shepherd. And a man like this blind man will come to him and recognize who he is, and so he gathers his flock. Let's look at the parable and then the points that he makes and draws from it. The parable in verses 1 to 6. Verily, verily, I say unto you, he that entereth not by the door into the fold of the sheep, but climbeth up some other way, the same is a thief and a robber. But he that entereth in by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. To him the porter openeth, and the sheep hear his voice, and he calleth his own sheep by name, and leadeth them out. When he hath put forth all his own, he goeth before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice. And a stranger will they not follow, but will flee from him, for they know not the voice of strangers. This parable spake Jesus unto them, but they understood not what things they were which he spake unto them. I suppose they knew all about shepherding and sheepfolds and stuff, but they didn't understand what he meant in referring to these things. There are 2 or 3 points here. A shepherd would come get his sheep out of the sheepfold and take them out to graze during the daytime. At night he would bring them to the sheepfold, and there would be several flocks of different owners that would be brought to that sheepfold and kept there overnight. The porter was the man that would tend to them overnight. There's a hedge that would be around about an area and keep them confined in that way. Then, when the owner of the sheep came to get his sheep the next morning, what did he have to do to get them separated from the others? Call them. And I understand they would often name them, call them by name. Their sheep would recognize the voice of their shepherd. They'd not listen to a stranger, but they would come, and he'd be able to gather his flock and take them out to pasture. So those are the things that lie back of this parable. Now, before we're done, we see Jesus making 3 points. There are 3 points of emphasis in this account. And in 7 to 18 now we have interpretation and application. And 2 of the points, and I think then the third one comes up later. Jesus therefore said unto them again, Verily, verily, I say unto you, I am the door of the sheep. All that came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not hear them. I am the door. By me, if any man enter in, he shall be saved, and shall go in and go out, and shall find pasture. He says, I am the door. Later he'll say, I am the shepherd. He uses two different points here. These are really conflict, but it doesn't have to agree. He's got a shepherd and sheepfold and all these things here, and he can draw one illustration and illustrate one thing, then he can draw on something else and illustrate something else. It's figurative expressions that he's using. The first thing is, I am the door. I am the door. And he'll express this idea in other words at other places, but you see the thought in verse 9. A man comes in through the door into the sheepfold, and there's salvation, there's safety. But the next day, the shepherd calls the sheep, and they go out through the door to what? Well, shall find pasture, he says. So, salvation and nourishment offered through him, the door. Now, he makes a second point. Verse 10, the thief cometh not, but that he may steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and may have it abundantly. So not just meager pasturage, but rich abundance of life is the thing that he offers. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd layeth down his life for the sheep. He that is a hireling and not a shepherd, whose own the sheep are not, beholdeth the wolf coming, and leaveth the sheep, and fleeth, and the wolf snatcheth them and scattereth them. He fleeth because he is a hireling, and careth not for the sheep. They don't belong to him. He's working for wages, and all he cares about is the wages, and he's certainly not going to risk his life for those sheep. I am the good shepherd, and I know mine own, and mine own know me, even as the Father knoweth me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. And other sheep I have, which are not of this fold, them also I must bring, and they shall hear my voice, and they shall become one flock, one shepherd. Therefore doth the Father love me, because I lay down my life, that I may take it again. No one taketh it away from me, but I lay it down of myself. I have power to lay it down, I have power to take it again. This commandment received I from my Father. Now, 2 or 3 points that we just have to touch. You need to do a little research and do a little more with this, but you need to consult this Old Testament background for this claim to be the Good Shepherd, because this is a claim to be the Messiah. I've given in the study guide several of the passages. There's several of them in the Old Testament prophets that are messianic prophecies, and where the Messiah is depicted as a shepherd who will tend and care for the sheep. Now, let me just refer to one, because it's got so much of this background in it. Ezekiel, the 34th chapter. First, there's the indictment of the rulers of Judah, because they are supposed to be the shepherds of the nation, but they've not done their job. They've not shepherded the nation. They've not cared about them. They've treated the sheep as if they were there for their own benefit. They fleece the sheep. They slaughter them. They eat them. So they're just out for their own gain. And so the sheep are scattered and eventually end up in captivity. Babylonian captivity is the thing that he refers to there. So he's going to bring judgment upon those shepherds. But then he goes on in that chapter to say, I, Jehovah, will shepherd the sheep. I'll go out. I'll seek them. I'll find them. I'll gather them together. I'll heal them. All of these things that a shepherd does. So first he says, I, Jehovah, will be the shepherd. But before he's done, he shows that he will do this shepherding work through the Messiah. I'll be their God, and my servant David will be their shepherd. So David, not the first David, the second David, the son of David, the seed of David, the Messiah, he will be the shepherd. All of this in Ezekiel chapter 34. Do you good to read that, and also the ones in Micah and Zechariah and other places. And it gives the background of this. So when Jesus says, I am the good shepherd, the students of the Old Testament should think of those Old Testament prophecies about the Messiah It is acclaimed to be the Messiah of Old Testament prophecy. But he identifies himself as a Messiah of a certain kind. A shepherd. Not just a hireling, but one who knows the sheep, cares for the sheep, gives up his life for the sheep. And we learn a good bit about the death of Jesus here from this account. It's, what do you call that, vicarious? He dies for the sheep, one for another. And it's voluntary. Nobody takes my life from me. I give it up. I lay down my life. The Father gave me the power to do this. He gave me the power to lay it down, to take it again. And so I lay down my life that I may take it again. No one taketh it from me, but I lay it down of myself. I received this commandment from the Father to be able to do this. He gave me this right, this authority to do this. And so he does it voluntarily. Connect that with so many places in John where it says they can't take him because his hour was not yet come. It would eventually come, but they'd only be able to put him to death when he lays down his life voluntarily. And just as we see who was in control in the Gospel of Mark, which we've studied, we see those same things again when we come to the end of the Gospel of John. All right, then one other thing just briefly. Verse 16. I think the best place to find the explanation of this is in the 11th chapter. Other sheep I have which are not of this fold. Them also I must bring, and they shall hear my voice, and they shall become one flock, one shepherd. In chapter 11, you have, in this very book, in the very next chapter, a parallel passage that explains that. Caiaphas, in verses 49 and 50, had, as the head of the Sanhedrin, had determined that Jesus will have to be put to death. He had made this statement, it is expedient for you that one man should die for the nation, that the whole nation perish not. Now verse 51 continues, now this he said not of himself, but being high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus should die for the nation, and not for the nation only, but that he might also gather together into one the children of God that are scattered abroad.